So last night, Thomas Tuchel took charge of an England game for the very first time and got himself a 2-0 win that I would say was pretty well deserved. England was certainly the better team. It was comfortable, it was efficient, we didn't necessarily set the world alight, but it was balanced. England achieved basic balance, and ultimately, in international football, that is all you need to do a lot of the time, particularly when you've got so many good footballers on the pitch. So how did Tuchel achieve balance? Well, he simplified things. He of course played with a back four, and in that back four we saw two left-footed defenders on the left side of the defence and two right-footed defenders on the right side of the defence. Balance, simple things being done at the back to make things just a little bit easier really for the team. Now the good thing about this back four is that they are all extremely comfortable moving into different positions. They can all shift across to the left or they can all shift across to the right in sort of back three setups. England are comfortable in different phases here, rotating whilst occupying the same zones of the pitch. And the other thing we had here really was overloads. So many England players in this deeper phase meant that Albania couldn't really get close. Of course, England were dominant in possession, but that was because we had so many players deep in the build-up phase. Like I said, Albania couldn't really get too close. The only criticism I would have here is that sometimes we had too many players dropping deep. Curtis Jones was often dropping into a deeper position, and I don't know that he was always needed in these areas. I don't know that 6 players was necessarily essential to our build-up, but regardless, England were certainly overloading this area of the pitch, and that's why we were able to control the ball. Now, the shape that we used here was really interesting because it was not a shape that we are currently seeing really in English football. Apart from Liverpool, no one else is using the approach that we saw from England last night. And that approach looked something like this. For now, we're going to push Curtis Jones a little bit further forward. And we're talking here about deep fullbacks in the build-up. Normally what we see at the moment is a team will shift to a back three, or we'll see fullbacks inverting into midfield or something like this. But if we focus on the first half initially, England didn't do that. But we also didn't push the fullbacks insanely high initially either. They played in this sort of deeper lying position, almost in line with Declan Rice, sometimes a little bit deeper with him. There was often spells where we did have this deep five, all actually playing pretty close to each other. And I believe, really, the intention here was to try and draw these wingers out to then create space for someone else further up the pitch. You see, if Skelly starts with a really high position, the defender is already there and it's difficult to progress the ball. Whereas when Skelly comes a little bit deeper, brings this player with him, you can see the access we are now creating just that little bit higher up the pitch. And we can take a quick look at this using Want's video analyzer to look at clips like this. I will leave a link in the description down below, but you can see what England are trying to do here. This is sort of, in this moment, a 2-3 shape. 2 centre-backs, Declan Rice in front of them, and then the full-backs either side of them. But these full-backs are pretty deep for modern day fullbacks in the build-up. They still, a few seconds later, are still in a really deep position. And like I said, I believe what they're trying to do is draw these players out. Draw these Albanian wingers out of their defensive position. Albania, of course, are a team that played in a really good block. A really good low block. One that was difficult to play through in moments. You might call it defensive, perhaps. But it was difficult for England to play through at times. I think the idea, though, was to try and bring these wingers out a little bit. So then you can get moments like this, and England did achieve this. You move the ball here, the winger comes out. If England were good in the combination moment here, going inside to either Declan Rice or Curtis Jones, we then had the free pass out to Kyle Walker, who in theory would have had all the time in the world to move the ball forward. The only thing that was lacking here was almost the understanding of the timings of the movement. Rice and Jones sort of get on top of each other a little bit here and get in each other's way. But you can see the idea, tactically, what we're trying to achieve. You can also see it in this clip. Again, a 2-3 shape. The fullbacks playing pretty deep, I would say, for modern fullbacks. Playing in these pretty deep positions. And as we move the ball across, you can see the Albanian players trying to get forward. Because Skelly is so deep, he is drawing the winger out towards him in this position. But what this does is it creates a little bit of space higher up the pitch. And when you've got someone like Dan Burn, who can, in moments, progress the ball through the lines, to Jude Bellingham receiving the ball on the half turn, that's exactly what you want. This is England progressing the ball well and having a clear idea of how we want to do it. The only thing I would really say on this is that England need a little bit more from the two wingers, Marcus Rashford and Phil Foden. Now, those two aren't helped by the fact that realistically neither of them are true traditional wingers. They both want to move inside the pitch a little bit. And in the first half, England's system initially didn't allow them to do that. We were using them more as sort of like an easy access point to move the ball forward. I just think they need to be more aggressive when they get the ball. Foden perhaps may struggle with that because physically he's not the greatest player in the world and he's not an amazing 1-versus-1 threat, so it can be tough for him. But I think Rashford has all the tools to do it, so I would like to see him trying to be a little bit more aggressive in these moments. But just generally speaking, I think England played pretty well in the first half in this shape. I think as we look to attack, the idea was quite clear. Someone's going to come towards the ball, and then someone else is going to go away from the ball. So let's say Declan Rice, for example. He's got the ball in this deeper position over here. What we're going to see is double movements all over the pitch. So Harry Kane will move a little bit deeper to try and bring the centre-back with him, and then Bellingham is going to be the one to go into that space, or Rashford will do it. Then in another moment, we'll see Jones come towards the ball so that Foden can go the other way and attack the space. This was a very, very clearly England's game plan. We saw this many times. One player towards the ball, one player away from the ball. One player towards the ball, one player away from the ball, all the way into the penalty area. And even actually the goal, these players here don't necessarily, rush towards the ball in this moment, but they're certainly playing a deeper position, right? Harry Kane and Rashford, you would expect them on the last line, but they've dropped a little bit deeper. And it means that when Jude Bellingham plays this pass, which is an absolute joke, it's Lewis Skelly on the ball. So that runner who went away from the ball to get in behind and scored a goal. I think it was a pretty good first half for England. Now, I've specified a few times there about the first half ideas or the first half being good. That would suggest that in the second half we saw something a little bit different, that it wasn't necessarily the same tactical approach, or if it was, it wasn't quite as effective. And I think it's fair to say that was the case. The second half was a little bit slow, a little bit stale, but actually I think it happened because England tried to be more attacking, which is weird because if you watched the game it didn't feel like that. But what England started to do in the second half was build possession more regularly in a back three shape. So Kyle Walker, Concert and Dan Burn would very often be the back three. Curtis Jones was now given license to move a little bit further forward, as was Lewis Skelly. So actually, I think England were now trying to put more men forward, but for me, there was an inconsistency with the movements. I think Thomas Tuchel mentioned it after the game about a lack of discipline with the positioning here, and I certainly felt that. So we may have had the back three and then the solo pivot, and that may have meant that we had several players overloading midfield, but in terms of the spacing of these guys, it was lacking a little bit. They were all sort of drifting toward each other. There were moments where they sort of look across and realise that they've made the same run as each other, or they've moved into the same space. They sort of get in each other's way a little bit, and obviously when that happens, you take away some of the rhythm of the game, the fluidity of the passing football, and I think then you lose your tempo, and that's why it becomes a little bit slow. Wembley becomes a little bit impatient, understandably so, and England then just start to splutter a little bit on the ball and aren't quite as nice to watch. And I think many of you guys would have felt the same in the second half. It wasn't quite as smooth. You can see here it's just a little bit of confusion with certain movements. Bellingham and Lewis Skelly both make the same movement. They both want to go towards the ball in this pocket, but it means actually that these four end up really, really close to each other. And actually, in a line like this, which, you don't have to be a tactical genius to know that if your players are in a line quite as basic as that, it's going to be fairly easy to read and to stop. It just doesn't feel here like England are flowing. They're almost too close to each other to actually be able to play quick football. I get it, right? When you've got good players, get them close, they combine. But this is a little bit too close. This is a little bit too close. The players don't have room to actually properly move into. And when you pick up the ball deeper here, you actually haven't got a ton of options. And you can see here, Curtis Jones and Lewis Skelly have a look at each other like, wait, who's meant to be where? And Declan Rice is actually standing between them. Declan Rice isn't actually bringing us much here in this position. He's actually almost in the way of the other two. So I felt this was the problem as the game went on. In the second half, yeah, it did get a little bit dull, a little bit boring. But still, I think, all things considered, this was Thomas Tuchel's first game. He's only had the squad for less than a week with training. It would be 3 or 4 days this week. I think we saw some interesting ideas there. Again, the deep fullbacks isn't something we tend to see. I think, again, the idea of some players coming towards the ball whilst you get runners in behind the defence, again, that was fairly obvious in this match. The thing for me that was lacking was the ability to progress the ball through the middle on the floor. Now, England do have some of the technicians to do that. Kane is a focal point you can go into. Jude Bellingham has amazing footwork when he receives the ball. Even Lewis Skelly, Curtis Jones. England need to try and do that a little bit more, but it's going to take time, right? We've got 18 months or so until the World Cup now. Of course, we need to qualify first, but Thomas Tuchel has time to figure things out. I think it was a good start without being an amazing start. Like I said right at the start, we didn't set the world alight, but it was comfortable, it was efficient, it was balanced, and I was pleased to see that. Positive signs. Let's see what happens on Monday, and then let's see what happens in the next international game, and then just keep going from there. In terms of actually right now, today, we've only had one game, so that's all we can talk about. It was decent. Hopefully we see improvement moving forward, which I'm sure we will. So, yeah, that is that. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please subscribe, leave a like, get notifications on, and I think that's it in terms of plugging everything. So I'll see you in the next one.